Hey there, Michael here with the reasonrxpodcast. Hope you're doing well. Today, teacher training. Talk about that, how it can be done better, what we can do, why it's needed. So, first of all, step back, fundamentals. We should not jump into something midstream. Is it needed? What is it? What's a teacher? What's education? We should think about some things like that before we start thinking about teacher training or teacher training reform. Is it needed? Should we train at all? What's the deal? So, first of all, let's think about the status of modern education. I'll share some stuff in the show notes with you about all this, of course, at least what I can fit in the show notes. Maybe I'll just have to make a little bit extra stuff if I need and put it in a blog post and post a link in the show notes to a blog or something. But even if we don't think education is declining, educational quality, it can still be better. Some people, of course, say education is declining in quality. Like, here's an article in Education Week, April 23rd, 2015, by Mark Tucker, entitled, "Why Have American Education Standards Collapsed?" First sentence in this, Mark Tucker writes, "In my last blog, I described how high school textbooks that used to be written at the 12th grade level for 12th graders are now written at the 7th or 8th grade level. I cited a report that said many community college teachers do not assign much reading at all to their first year students because they cannot write." Later on, under the article, Mark Tucker says, what the story comes down to is that the United States, having led the world in educational attainment for more than a century, thereby enabling it to produce the world's best educated workforce, has, since the 1970s, made no gains at all in either attainment or quality. While close to 30 other countries, some of them abjectly poor in the 1970s, have managed to outperform us on both quality and quantity of education, many by a country mile. Even more damning, we appear to have lowered our standards for our college students to the standards we used to demand of our high school students, and, at the same time, to have more or less destroyed what was once a first-class vocational and technical education system. The very high quality of our best public schools and independent schools, of a handful of colleges with strong liberal arts curricula, of a few leading community colleges, and of graduate education in our leading research universities, generally has masked the collapse of standards in the great mass of institutions serving our students at all levels. Fixing all this is not impossible. It is actually essential. But it cannot be done at all until we fess up to the consequences of our willingness to tolerate an across-the-board decline in standards and a failure to modernize our system for 40 years or more." End quote. Of course, some people disagree, as Mariana Stenger seems to, in opencolleges.edu.au, but that's Australia. Says, myth of the week, the declining quality of education. 4 June 2013. She starts, quote, "One of the most popular myths in education is the one that says the quality of education in the U.S., and worldwide for that matter, has been steadily declining for years now," unquote. But some stuff she says in here is like, in 93, 86% of American students completed high school compared to 82% in 1972. Well, who cares? That doesn't have to do with the quality. That's how many graduate. Today, 60% go on to post-secondary studies and a quarter receive bachelor's degrees. Like, so what? What's the quality of the education? And that's me commenting. Okay, so she says about the percentages, and I'm saying, so what? She does say, she claims, quote, a 2008 report by the National Center for Education Statistics that looked at students aged 9, 13, and 17 showed that average scores had gone up since 2004. Average reading scores were 12 points higher than they had been in 1971 for 9-year-olds and 4 points higher for 13-year-olds. But what about 12th graders? So that was 13-year-olds, unquote. And I'm saying, what about 12th graders? She says, quote, in mathematics, the average scores for 9 and 13-year-olds also showed an increase from 2004 at 24 points higher than 1973 for 9-year-olds and 15 points higher for 13-year-olds. The average scores for 17-year-olds, both in math and reading, showed no significant changes when compared to those from the 70s, unquote. So, and then she doubts that there's some decline. But I'll put links to some of this, as I say, in the show notes, so you can read some of this for yourself. The NAEP, the Nation's Report Card, they report, I think this is from 2015 results, if that's what they show. I'll put a link, you can just see for yourself. They got some stuff that's more recent, though. 2015, maybe this is 2017, I don't know. But the results they have 2019, whatever, are. We'll look at grade 12 because that's what's most relevant. They're showing the percent of students at or above NAEP proficient in this test. Only 24% are at or above proficient in math. 37% at or above proficient in reading. 22% at or above proficient in science. 12% at or above proficient in history. So, in other words, 76% are below proficient in math. 63% are below proficient in reading. 78% are below proficient in science. And I'll put a link to this, of course, as I say, in the show notes. So you can look at this. Maybe some of the stuff you could look at as we're talking. You know, some stuff I'll link to and talk about. USnews.com. US News and World Report. October 30th, 2019. Across the board, scores drop in math and reading for US students. Math and reading scores for 4th and 8th graders in the US dropped since 2017. Peggy Carr, Associate Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics, said, quote, over the past decade, there has been no progress in either mathematics or reading performance, and the lowest performing students are doing worse, unquote. And, of course, there's other things in the article. But that's a little bit for you. Of course, you can look up more on your own. Decline of SAT scores. If I can find one website to analyze that really well, I looked at that years ago. I'll link to that. Otherwise, I can't, obviously. But clearly, education needs to improve. Even if it's not declining, there's still room for improvement. We need to get those proficient percentages up. And we can do better. It's like we can always do better regardless. We need to be honest, not lazy. We need to think about what's best for ourselves, our children, our students, our culture. It can be better. So regardless, we should make education better. And there's different ways to do that. One thing, of course, that's key is teacher training to get quality teachers out there. That's one thing we need. We've got some experience with that ourselves. You know, we've experienced the state of modern education A lot of us have been students, no matter whether it's been public, private, boarding school, homeschooled, whatever. We all know that some teachers do pretty well and are inspiring. Some might seem inspiring at the time, but then later we learn all that they do is let us have fun. They do not teach. They just play around, play games, get by. You don't really learn much. And we know some teachers who cannot do a good job. Heart's in the right place. They want it. They care. They love teaching. They want to help. But they cannot explain or communicate well. And we know some materials that are hard to understand. Books and texts that are not well written. Materials, worksheets, the wording of things. Explanations from teachers. Sequence and series from teachers in a class or across years. Teacher training could be improved. Some stuff that's done now. Of course, there's already some teacher training. So what are they doing? Like here at, you can just look at some stuff here and there on the internet, look at the colleges, see what they do. Broward College in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Just to get some typical stuff. Some stuff they do at teacher certification. Here it says the fully online alternative certification courses offered at Broward College include the following. Instructional strategies. This course prepares participants to become proficient in planning, organizing, and implementing instructional strategies for the contemporary PK-12 classroom. A variety of research-validated effective instructional strategies are reinforced, including those that support constructivist approaches to classroom organization and student learning. Participants will learn to identify, deliver, and improve instructional strategies that are most appropriate in specific circumstances, including the needs of diverse learners, unquote. How much is it helping us? Quote, classroom management. This course provides identification and knowledge of classroom management and communication theories, strategies, and concerns, unquote. Of course, classroom management makes sense. Instructional strategies make sense. And here's one that's entitled Foundations of Research-Based Practices in Reading Education. Here's one, Principles of Educational Psychology. Makes sense. It's good to know. Quote, this course provides a foundation in educational psychology and its application to classroom settings. Special emphasis is placed on development, learning theory, cognition, motivation, diversity, teaching, and assessment, unquote. And if done right, that's good stuff to know. We don't all know all of that just from everyday life. Then there's, of course, educational test and measurement. Makes sense. Introduction to Exceptional Student Education. Here, University of North Texas. Up there in Denton, Texas. Some online courses are Everyone Can Learn, Applying Theory to Teaching Practice. Curriculum Development for Culturally Diverse Learners. Maintaining Classroom Discipline. Literacy for All. So they require, in a lot of places, a bachelor's degree in a specific area. Math, history, physics, whatever. And then some teacher training to get a certificate. And then you have to do some practice teaching while someone watches you, evaluates you, stuff like that. But let's see. On this course, I'll click on that. Everyone Can Learn. What do they say? Quote, processes of learning and development related to teaching in diverse EC to 12 classroom settings. Cognitive, social, physical, and moral development research is presented, and practical examples applied to teaching practice are demonstrated. Unquote. And other stuff. And similar, we got Missouri State University, similar stuff. They've got required core, 25 to 35 hours, general methods of instruction in the middle and secondary schools, educational psychology, introduction to multicultural education and diversity, educational alternative for exceptional students, reading and writing in the content fields, analysis and correction of difficulties in literacy, teaching methods course, supervised teaching, 8 to 12 hours, things like that, and others. That's pretty much what's going on teacher training today. So, if it were good and legit, and that's all we needed, everything would be copacetic. But it's obviously not. Education could be better. Should be better. We deserve it. Students deserve it. Our children deserve it. So, let's think about what should be some kernels, some chief essentials in teacher training. So again, let's think about, okay, what is education? What is a teacher? We've seen education could be better. There's evidence it's declining. Some people might argue, but no one can argue that we cannot do it better. Education can improve. Even to quote, as I had before, Martin Luther King, in an article he wrote in 1947 in the Morehouse College campus newspaper called the Maroon Tiger. Something Martin Luther King wrote clearly when he was in college in the campus newspaper. Let's see, scroll down to that in my notes here. Sorry, 1 second. I will do a search, edit, find, Martin. Okay, here we go. So, quote from that article by Martin Luther King. Education must also train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. To think incisively and to think for oneself is very difficult. We are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. At this point, I often wonder whether or not education is fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of these so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit, in many instances, do not give us objective and unbiased truths. To save man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Unquote. Martin Luther King, 1947. So, whether there's been declining quality or not, there's still room for improvement. But, as we say, what is this education stuff? What do we need to be trained for? If we think of some basic definitions, look at definition education, just a basic thing, education. It's, as it says on even Wikipedia, education is the process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, morals, beliefs, and habits. In some dictionaries, dictionary.com, education is both the act of teaching knowledge to others in the act of receiving knowledge from someone else. Okay. More technically, the philosopher Dr. Leonard Peikoff, let's see, to paraphrase, I do not have this exact, education is the systematic training of the conceptual faculty of the young in order to develop in them the content and methods they need for adult life. So there's a more technical definition. It's specifically about developing the conceptual faculty, the ability to reason. You know, we have training for other things. You can have, we're talking about essential key education in general. There can be some, specific education, engineering education, teacher education, training for athletics or to be a farmer or a plumber or a lawyer. Here we're looking at the broad, basic concept of education, not some specific use of it. So, that's education. And then, a teacher, what is a teacher? Clearly we kind of know, but we want to know it's a person who helps students to acquire knowledge, competence, or virtue from Wikipedia or Cambridge Dictionary. To teach is to give someone knowledge or to train someone. So we've got to think about things so we can key in on what exactly the hell we're talking about and how to improve it, what to do. So if we think about more, what is a teacher? What is education? That'll help. Think about what some great people think. When I looked at Martin Luther King, he's given us some good advice. Education could be better. And he says, a chief aim is to help us be logical and rational. So clearly, that should be part of a teacher's education. If a teacher didn't know what logic and reason are and how to help people do these things that he was talking about, like discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, the facts from the fiction, sift and weigh evidence, engage in quick, resolute, and effective thinking, think incisively and to think for oneself. If one does not have that on one's own, one cannot convey that to someone else. Not possible. One must be beyond practicing it. One must understand it. So there's that nonsensical stuff that some people read. Let's see, where did my browser go? Is that it? Bam, got it. Okay, so a lot of us have probably heard the anti-intellectual, ludicrous, childish little thing, like from George Bernard Shaw. Those who can do, those who can't teach. Tell that to Bruce Lee. If you think those who can't teach, take it up with Bruce Lee, bring it on. That's ludicrous. Bruce Lee is known. Anybody who really knows Bruce Lee knows he was a teacher at heart, to the root, in his being. He was a master of practice and teaching both. So the proper thing is not the little low-quality mind of George Bernard Shaw, but more of what Bruce Lee did and lived and practiced. Or Aristotle. As he said, those who know, do. Those that understand, teach. Teach proper, because that's what it takes. You cannot teach if you merely know. You have to understand if you are going to teach. So you need people with understanding. And there have been a lot of teachers like that. John Wooden, one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time, also taught English at UCLA, a teacher. Dr. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner in physics, one of the greatest physicists of all time, was also a teacher. J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame taught English a bit. There are others, of course. So we need people who don't merely know and can't do. That's just incompetence. As Bruce Lee, John Wooden, Aristotle, others show, we need people who understand. We need depth. So if we think about other educators and teachers there have been, we can get some more ideas of where to look, what's going on. Dr. Maria Montessori was trained as a physician in Italy, one of the first women to get a medical degree in Italy before World War II, became a great teacher and developed the Montessori method. It's interesting, she was the fascist instituted Montessori education because they thought it was like outdoorsy and stuff, but then they found out how it instilled independent thought in students and then shut all the schools down. I don't remember when it was, but Montessori had to leave the country, go to India. Could not stay in Italy with the fascists in power around World War II. So, Dr. Maria Montessori, what does she say? What should we think of as a teacher? She says, the vision of the teacher should be at once precise, like that of the scientist, and spiritual, like that of the saint. The preparation for science and the preparation for sanctity should form a new soul. For the attitude of the teacher should be at once positive, scientific, and spiritual. Positive and scientific because she has an exact task to perform, and it is necessary that she put herself into immediate relation with the truth by means of rigorous observation. Spiritual because it is to people that his powers of observation are to be applied, and because the characteristics of the creature who is to be his particular subject of observation are spiritual, unquote. The teacher is a scientist, at least a good teacher. She also says some other quotes from this one website. The books that these come from and the exact page and all that is not listed here, but I've read some Montessori. It's been years, decades, but this sounds legit. So, quote, for one thing, we discovered that education is not something which the teacher does, but that it is a natural process which develops spontaneously in the human being. Kind of, sort of. Unquote. Kind of, sort of. So, she says, scrolling down, another quote. Scientific observation then has established that education is not what the teacher gives. Education is a natural process spontaneously carried out by the human individual and is acquired not by listening to words, but by experiences upon the environment, unquote. Notice Montessori has teachers. It's not a free-for-all, do whatever. So she doesn't mean no teachers or totally spontaneous. It takes a prepared environment so that spontaneity can actually process correctly and not go haywire. Prepared environment, master teachers who know the materials and the methods. She says here, quote, The teacher must derive not only the capacity, but the desire to observe natural phenomena. The teacher must understand and feel her position of observer. The activity must lie in the phenomenon. Unquote. Quote, we recommend for the training of teachers not only a considerable artistic education in general, but special attention to the art of reading. So, the teacher should be scientist and spiritual. The teacher should be at once precise, like that of the scientist, and spiritual, like that of the saint. And then I'll put a link to this too. Jenny Sackett, in a journal, 2016, I think it is, spring 2016, The Scientist in the Classroom, The Montessori Teacher is Scientist. That's the title. Quote, Jenny Sackett shares insights ignited by a presentation given by Professor Raniero Regni in Rome at an AMI International Trainers meeting. Dr. Regni stated that to go beyond Montessori is to rediscover Montessori. Montessori is waiting for us in the future. Unquote. By examining Montessori's writings, Sackett traces the subtle ways in which Montessori's scientific pedagogy has gradually become more associated with the teaching profession than with that of scientists, and she urges us to remember Maria's scientific foundations. Quote, experiment, observation, evidence or proof, unquote. Because we study children, not brains, in a prepared environment, and because we offer experiences and do not impose experiences, we are uniquely posed to, quote, help contemporary neuroscience, unquote, and contribute to further research, unquote. Right. We've got to look holistically. Too much nonsense about brains nowadays. We need to think about the children, the whole. Think about the human animal in their human species appropriate environment. So there, we can start to narrow down on what we really need to do. We get the big picture instead of getting lost in some of these little courses that some people offer that I don't see evidence of being really effective and efficient. You know, clearly they're not totally bad. But things clearly could be better. Always could be better. There's always room for improvement. People should be trained to be more like scientists, to observe, to develop. And like in Montessori education, in their teacher training, it's some good stuff. They read Montessori's own writings. Some of their textbooks is the Montessori writings. People need to learn the Montessori materials because they're scientifically developed and related. People need to know how to use a certain material, Montessori classroom material, manipulatives, and how students work with them, what they're intended for, how they develop from prior materials, how they lead into others, how it relates to the nature of the child and to the child's development, physically, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, in their motor activities and skills. And they need to know Montessori methods as well. So the theory, what's the philosophy of Montessori education? What is learning? What is a child? What are the Montessori materials? How do they relate to each other? What are the methods? Here on this one website, American Montessori Society, there's different ones, some better than others. But here it says, typically it takes 1 to 2 years to earn an AMS credential. 1 to 2 years, it's like, I think about what it takes for typical teacher certification anyway. Here it says, quote, this includes academic hours that take place in person with an instructor or as a blend of in-person and online experiences. These hours vary by course level and include invigorating classroom discussion as well as hands-on activities. Unquote. And you have to do, it says here, quote, once your coursework is complete, you will be ready for a practicum, a real-life, year-long experience with children in a Montessori classroom. Experienced mentors will guide your practice and observe your growth as a professional. Unquote. And there we have some good, focused teacher training. And it depends on the Montessori place that's training the teacher, of course, like anything else. But the broad perspective we need to have in here is, as Montessori says, a teacher should be like a scientist and a saint. We need to try to develop those. Seems like the scientific part can be more trained. The saint part, you can't make someone be good. Someone's got to develop that to some extent on their own. But if they're going to be scientific, what do they need? We need, as some people point out, Aristotle and others, we need understanding. We need to know logic. What is the logic? What's real scientific method? Not the fake stuff that people say about scientific method from convention without really thinking about it, following Plato. So if we're going to have good teacher education, one thing teachers need to be masters of is logic. Logic, it's not, and I don't mean the deductive stuff or symbolic logic or some nonsense like that some people think about. Logic is the art and science of correct conceptual thought. That's what we're engaged in, so teachers should be aware of and have some level of mastery of it. You're trying to teach knowledge to students, so what the hell is knowledge? We're teaching knowledge to humans. Other animals have some form of education, training, elephants, chimpanzees. They don't just run around like little machines. They got to learn some things. It's been proven. Ravens. Some animals have been shown to have some kind of like culture as well as some education. Animals have to learn some things as they're growing up about what to avoid, how to hunt, what to eat, what not to eat, how to behave around others, things like that. But we need some conceptual education. Teachers should know the thing they're dealing with, just like a craftsman should know their tools. If you're going to be a plumber, you got to know your plumbing instruments. If you're going to be a carpenter, you got to know your hammer and nail and saw and things like that. Study them, use them, see how they work. How to, like carpenter, how to work with wood. Electrician, how to work with electricity and wire and diagrams. The teacher should know how to work with words and concepts and know what the hell they are. Straight up simple. So we should know logic and grammar. Logic, again, because that's essential to science and doing it right. And epistemology in general is about the stuff that a teacher is doing as an intellectual to help someone else reason and think and know. And grammar, because we're about communication. Teachers should have some mastery of words and language, some craftsmanship abilities with that. I don't care what they're teaching. if you're good at math and you're going to teach, you better know how to. Teaching means you're working with others. If all you're good at is math, then go do math at a desk on your own somewhere. If you're going to teach, you must know some grammar and some language, how to put words together, how to express things in different ways, how to have emphasis, how to make some things interesting, how to bring in quotes from different areas and literature and all that, movies, to make it relevant, not just for distracting temporary fun. So logic, grammar, someone should know other subjects because you're not teaching yourself. You need to be there teaching someone else who has other interests and let them know how that subject is relevant to other things and how things work together. Multidisciplinary thinking and teams is a big thing today because it works and is effective, and there's been a failure to do it in too much in past decades. No one does math in isolation. You can't. It's always as a human living on this earth in relation to other things. Try learning math without ever talking English or some other language. Not going to happen. Need to know about human life in general. You know, who the heck is it you're teaching? What's a child? A child's going to develop into an adult. You're not teaching a child. What we're really teaching is someone who is going to be independent, is going to be an independent adult. That's our goal, our vision, the development. We need to think about developing that, where they've been, where they're going. What's important in human life, why we care. So we need to know the subject, logic, grammar, other subjects, multidisciplinary stuff, human life in general. Then, of course, as we've seen in some of these courses, and as we know from common sense, people need to know they're going to teach some psychology, sociology, history, child psychology, developmental psychology, aesthetics, etc. But some things that are missing that we do not have today and that we need to really improve it, as I say, are logic, grammar, multidisciplinary thinking, and putting things in context of human life. So let's look at some of that. Now in logic, I mean logic, epistemology. As I say, I don't mean merely deduction or obeying or doing a math problem that has nothing to do with anything else. Logic, epistemology. That's about concepts, thoughts, propositions, sentences, theories. In logic, we need to see how concepts and concretes are related. When people are taught things without it being concretized, they're just memorizing words. They don't have real knowledge. There's rules to forming concepts. You know, without concretes, we don't know what the hell we're talking about, literally. Knowledge is an awareness of reality. If I point to my own head, that's where the awareness is. If I point to something else, that's the reality. Knowledge is an awareness, pointing to my head, of reality, pointing to something. That's when we have knowledge. That's a basic. There's certain rules of forming concepts. We don't have time to get into all of them here, obviously. But teachers should know what a concept is and how to form a concept, because that's what they're trying to do with students. That's one thing that causes some failures, or causes some people to fake education. They can memorize a lot of stuff. They can have their big PhD, but it amounts to nothing. All they're doing is engaging in some social behavior, working with words, not really knowing how to be effective at knowing what's true, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, and other people. So concepts. We need to know how to generalize. I think it's like an educational crime that when people leave 8th grade, they don't know the difference between induction and deduction, which should be basic. Induction is the cognitive process of forming a generalization. Deduction is the cognitive process of using a generalization on a particular or something less general. So deduction never goes more general. It stays at its own level of abstraction or goes more concrete. Induction always goes more abstract, more general. We can learn induction. All humans are mortal. We start with particular individuals in a context and some causal relationships, and we form the generalization, whoa, all humans are mortal. And then if we meet someone new and we're applying that to them, that's a deduction. Like the classic one, all humans are mortal. Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Deduction. Sherlock Holmes was very deductive in his cases. He had to do induction before he went out and did his deduction in the cases. He had to study cigarette ashes, which he does in this paper he wrote, a monograph, is recorded in the first ever story about Sherlock Holmes that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. But Sherlock Holmes studied the ashes of cigars and cigarettes to see what the different ones were like, what color, texture, smell, different characteristics. So then he knew what they were like in general, and then he could identify a particular one. He had these general ideas about the ashes and cigarettes, so he could identify what these particular ashes were in a particular case. He would study them, he would generalize, he's got his generalizations, and he can apply a generalization to some particular ashes that he sees on the floor in a particular room in a particular case. Deduction. Again, all humans are mortal. We see that by having learned some individual people and learning that they die and a lot more. And then, with that classic thing about Socrates, we can apply that generalization to a person. So people should know, teachers should know about how to form concepts, what's going on there, how to form a generalization, because that's a lot of education. All the stuff we do. Physics, chemistry, history, fitness. There's a lot of generalizations we need to form in fitness to do it right. Concept formation, induction, classification. How to classify, what are the rules of classification? Is it the correct level of abstraction? How does classification relate to scientific research? You can find sometimes some people don't classify things correctly, and that destroys their ability to find a cause. Like the ancient Greeks classified motion as natural or violent. And this bad classification is one thing that kept them from developing a proper, valid theory of physics. Galileo and Newton had to come along and see that all this stuff is classified the same because they're moved by a force, and then figure out what a force is. So concept formation, induction, classification, definition. Definitions sum up what we've learned so far. Having a clear definition helps people understand what exactly they're talking about. Definitions are like tools of research. They identify the essence of what have we learned so far as we're going along. Like, what's the essence of a planet? What's the essence of cancer? What's the essence of a linear equation? What's the essence of synecdoche? What's the essence of a poem? Some things we need good definitions for to know what we're talking about. History of science shows us that. Bad definitions destroy thought. Good definitions help us know what exactly we're identifying, helps us progress. And of course, some of this stuff is wrapped up together. What do we classify? We classify concepts. What do we define? We define the things in a concept. Definitions tell us the essence of what's in a concept. Humans, logic, physics, projectile, literature, push-up, whatever. Notice how definitions are essential in sports. Coaches, players, referees, umpires need to know exactly what a footfall is, what a touchdown is, and so on and so forth. Without good definition, we couldn't play sports. You need to classify different things. Classification, obviously, in biology and botany and zoology and medicine. So these are some things, clearly, hopefully it's clear, we need to know. And then some general ideas of epistemology. Teachers should all be aware of hierarchy across subjects and all human knowledge. It's like kind of clear in math. No one argues about that. You know, you got to learn number, and then you can learn, you know, some basic things, and then you can learn some counting, then arithmetic, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Then eventually you can learn pre-algebra, then algebra 2, then calculus. One thing depends upon another. It builds up in a hierarchy. And clearly that's important in teaching. I mean, you got to know, what should a student know to learn a certain concept on a certain level? Where are you on that level? The teacher should be able to move around in their head. What's going to be happening next? What happened before? What's left and right, up and down? You need to know how to teach, how to review, how to remediate, and that means you know some hierarchy. It's not just in math, it's in physics too. Do physics right, study it from a historical perspective, and you can see how it develops step by step and how some concepts built upon others. And it comes up, it's clear in, you know, like besides the math, people are aware of it in martial arts, some music, some sports. Martial arts has a definite hierarchy, one belt after another. You got to learn certain skills before you learn certain others. But what we got to do is see that that's not just limited to math or just to martial arts. A lot of people know that, but very few generalize hierarchy as a principle of all human thought and reasoning. That's something we need to do. Teachers need to get that so they can teach better. Explain, remediate, review, develop. Hierarchy, integration, everything's connected. Connect, connect, connect. That's what, for example, Newton did in becoming a great physicist and scientist and starting modern physics more than anybody else had. He actually had the great synthesis. That's what universal gravitation and other things were. He synthesized terrestrial mechanics with celestial mechanics. Things on Earth had the same physics of motion as things in the heavens. F equals ma was the same with an apple falling as with the moon going around the Earth, or a moon going around Jupiter, or Jupiter going around the sun, or twirling a ball on a string around your head. It's a great synthesis, the great integration, seeing universal gravitation. It's not just in the heavens between Earth and sun or whatever. It's everywhere. Between one billiard ball and another, between one marble and another, between a person and another, between a person and Jupiter. So a basic principle: hierarchy, integration, connect, context. Everything is a context. You get generalizations in a particular context, and so they're valid in that context and not out of it. Like when Newton discovered his physics, he did so in context of the concretes he used. That's what defines and scientifically, logically, rigorously defines, circumscribes what he is talking about, what the context is. Things that go only so fast. I don't remember. I think the fastest thing he knew about was only like 70% the speed of light. I don't think it was even 90. And he didn't know about anything at the atomic level. So his theory pertains to that. The idea that it should apply arbitrarily, omnisciently to everything is ludicrous. It is not how knowledge works. The amazing thing is how what Newton found could be extended beyond what he knew, the concretes he knew. It could be extended to the atomic level. So there's one example of the importance of context. And we got to remember that it's an important idea when we're growing up. It's broader than just educational psychology. We're talking about logic here. Our context develops as we get older. Obviously, we'd hope so. You get smarter, you know more, you learn about more things in the world, more concrete things, more dogs, more people, more apples, more kinds of animals, more kinds of plants, more things that can happen in the world, more languages, more ways people can speak. When someone's young, they don't have the context to have the concept of government. Not possible. They don't have the context to get the concept of atom. Not possible. That's one thing we've got to realize and appreciate. What concrete things and concepts and generalizations do we need before we can understand a certain idea? And again, that's getting back to some of this stuff where it comes together. Concepts, integration, context, understanding, learning, education, teaching. When do we have everything so we can just screw in the light bulb a little tighter and bam, the light comes on? Context helps us see that. And we need to know about some logic of explanation. That's what we want to do. People should be able to explain things and know what's a good explanation, the bad, and how to do it. Teachers should be offered that. They deserve it. It is not good that they are not taught how to explain better. A lot of them love what they're doing. They don't have a good ability to explain who is responsible for that. Now, preferably, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, education should have some logic in it slowly, depending on context and hierarchy. People can learn some logic slowly through the years. It doesn't take a genius to know that truth is about knowing something real. We learned that when we were 2, 5, You learn the difference between the truth and the lie. Truth corresponds to something real. Someone says something where the words don't describe the situation that you actually saw. You and your friend did something. You shouldn't have done it. Then your friend tells the parent something else. Oh, we didn't do it. This happened. Well, it's a lie. The thought does not describe the real world. There's not an identification of concrete, real things going on. It's divorcing, separating the conceptual from experience. You're not identifying and staying true to the evidence of the senses. It doesn't take much. So some basic logic can be learned depending on context and hierarchy. You can develop through the years, slow by slow, little by little. I mean, what? Do people not do any definitions in like junior high school? You know, a lot of people do this bad vocabulary stuff where you get a word, you look up and write down some shapes next to it that you copy from a dictionary, and it's called vocabulary. But we have this opportunity for everyone. We all know. I mean, maybe it's not done so much in some places anymore, but people can develop concepts by doing that. It's a great opportunity to get some of the words, to break it down, to identify what are the concretes that this is identifying, instead of just having some airy-fairy thing written out next to it. Oh, use it in a sentence. No. What are the concretes that identify it? How are these concretes different from others? Like, how is a table different from a chair and a bed? What's the general thing that they all are? Table, chair, bed. They're all furniture. But a table differs from others by being a flat surface with supports on which we place smaller things. A bed, a flat surface with supports on which we lie to sleep. A chair, a flat surface with supports on which we sit. And it's in contrast to, the furniture is in contrast to other things in the house that come temporarily, like food, forks and knives, people, dogs go in and out. So we got these things in a context that we can define and classify. That's a little bit about what else is going on when we form a concept. We got concrete things, things that are similar. Some certain things are similar to others, so they're tables. We got they're different than others. There's contrast. Chairs, beds, sofas. Then it's in a context, a house, inside a habitation. Things like that are going on with concepts. So we could take some of this stuff that we're actually doing in vocabulary, in English, and let people learn how to form concepts, because that's one thing we need to do in education. As I said, education is a systematic training of the young in order to develop in them the knowledge, the concepts, and the methods they need to function independently as adults. They need to know, at least implicitly, how to form a concept. They got to learn new things. They got to work. They got to do stuff at work. They want to be efficient in their thinking. They want to work smarter, not harder. This is how. And then the teachers would have a better understanding of what they're doing in their subject. They would like it more, be clearer. It would help with their communication and their explanation. And so we need to know how to do concepts, how to generalize, engage in integration, how to classify, how to define. We should know principles of hierarchy, integration, connecting, how to prove and validate things, some deduction and arguments, logic of explanation, because we need to do that. We talked about the difference between induction and deduction. So, and I guess some more examples later. We'll talk a little bit about grammar. Grammar, you look it up, grammar, how we put thoughts and concepts together into thoughts and sentences. We clearly need that for clear communication. Notice my cat is good grammar. Meow. Okay, we heard some speech and communication and well put together meows from my cat there. Prince. Okay. He's continuing to talk to us. Thank you, Prince. It's a valuable contribution. I appreciate it. So, one good thing that helps with grammar is sentence diagramming. I love it. A lot of people love it. Some don't. Partly, of course, it depends how it's taught. People can get more out of it. If someone just does it as a little game, one doesn't get much out of it. It should be taught so that we pull out some logic of what's going on and learn to think better and not just go through this little pattern that becomes rote and we turn off our brains and stop thinking about it. And it should be used for more than 1 year. It shouldn't just come up in like 8th grade or whatever and then disappear. It should be done. Grammar should be taught slowly with some sentence diagramming through years in school. Okay? Just like logic could be done in school. If logic was done in school, as I was going to say and then forgot, then some of this stuff wouldn't need to be done or could be done differently in teacher training. But it's not even done. So this should be done in teacher training, and then we can start to teach it in schools, and there can be this good, positive feedback, improving individual teachers, students, children in our culture, where as people learn more in junior high school and high school, they bring in more to teacher training, and so it can be done better, more effectively, and different. It can be more targeted. They do this background that they don't have now. As I say, I think everyone should know what induction and deduction are out of junior high school. It's not difficult. As I said right there, a generalization versus applying a generalization. Then you can get into more of how it's done in high school to some extent. And if people would learn some chemistry historically, how it developed, learn physics historically, how it developed, they would be learning how we generalize, form concepts, can be right or wrong. So they're learning lessons they could apply all through life and as adults, which they need. The idea that all you know is memorize stuff and you're always right is ludicrous. That applies to no adult ever. Everyone will make mistakes, clearly look at modern society and human history. Look at how people were illogical and wrong and irrational and needed help. Obvious. How can we not learn from that? Well, clearly we know because we're like social animals, but, it's a hypothetical question. But with grammar, back to that, how to put words and concepts together into thoughts and sentences. Sentence diagramming would help us with that. We could have focus classes in teacher training, practice expressing things and communicating things. I don't care if you love physics and you're good at it. I don't care if you love math and you're good at it. You have to communicate that to human animals. Why does it matter? Who cares? How can you explain it? We need to be able to express our thoughts well to do that. Grammar is how we put our concepts and thoughts together in sentences. It helps with reading, writing, speaking. But more fundamental to all that, what do all those three things require? Thinking. Grammar is actually a little part of logic. It's an aspect of logic. Grammar, good grammar would help teachers be more logical and help convey that to students. And I wouldn't recommend too much. There's not a lot of grammar you didn't know as a general human adult, as a teacher. Grammarians can get into all the fine details, but everybody in teachers should know basic sentences, compound sentences, prepositional phrases, sentences with those in them, subordinate clauses, complex sentences, complex, which have clearly main and subordinate clauses in them, some verbals, verbs used as other parts of speech, gerunds, participles, infinitives. After that point, there wouldn't be much benefit for teachers, but up to that point, I think it's necessary, critical. With some sentence diagramming, that helps you become a master of your thoughts, of language, to pay more attention to word choice and word order. And if people were more aware of that, they wouldn't be lost in certain languages and certain ways of explaining things. They'd be more masters of their tools, like the logic we talked about. We need logic to be masters of the tools, just as A carpenter needs to be masters of their tools. Same thing with grammar. Teachers communicate to people through language. We need to have mastery to some extent of that language to do it well. One thing I find in tutoring and teaching, a problem people have in math and physics and chemistry in doing word problems is not the math or physics or chemistry, it's the grammar. They do not know how to parse or break up a word problem. That's the problem. So if teachers had that, they could diagram and break apart stuff. They could parse a sentence for students to help them see what's going on, and students could learn that habit and do it on their own. There shouldn't be this nonsense about, this is a math class, why do we have to do English? This is physics, what does English matter? This is English, why are we talking about a math word problem or a theorem or some stuff about reading a passage about physics? That's ludicrous. That's not reality. No one in reality does that ever as an adult. Everything's all mixed up and interrelated and integrated. So, logic, grammar, multidisciplinary thinking, that should be part of teacher training too. Logic, that could be done over the course of a year or two slowly in teacher education. That's how long it takes. Grammar, a semester or two. Multidisciplinary thinking could come up, doesn't have to be taught on its own, could come up in some other courses. The human life thing could also, we could have some courses like, if you're going to teach math, how does math apply to human life and to science, physics, chemistry, accounting? How can you make it relevant to other people? I mean, why is that not a course that is taught? Until we get to the point where some of that comes up in education in general, and then people know that, and then they'd be a student learning how math is used in everything, then they wouldn't need to be educated in it anymore. Or it could be more refined. But teachers should know how to make something relevant and to different students and how to connect to them. How does math, physics, chemistry, fitness come up in human life? Why is it important? Why should we care? How does it make you live better? How does it help you make the most of your life? Be happier, help friends, help family, help the culture, because it does. Multidisciplinary thinking, part of the human life thing, you could separate them a little bit, should be taught. People, after all, who are very successful usually have different interests. Richard Feynman, the great Nobel Prize winning physicist who I've mentioned, did experiments on ants, learned to play the bongo drums. He wasn't just head in the sand into physics. He couldn't have been as great as he was if that's what he did. One thing he did to learn about how to do science right, what thinking was, he learned when he was 5 from his dad. It's even in the movie Infinity about Richard Feynman. Not the Marvel movie Infinity or whatever, but the movie Infinity shows Richard Feynman as he's growing up, early adulthood, from a kid to early adulthood. Really good movie, recommend it. But when he's about 5, he reports that he was, and this is written somewhere, what Richard Feynman wrote, and the movie Infinity was based on a lot of his own writings, remembering how he grew up, and maybe from some interviews with other people or whatever. But when he was about 5, he was taking a walk in a park. At least that's how it's portrayed in the movie. Maybe this was at home or something, but there's a bird, and he asked his dad, what kind of bird is that? And his dad says, it's a beautiful bird. It's a marvelous bird. And little Richard Feynman says, but what's it called? And his dad says, I could tell you the name of that bird. In Chinese, it's called this. In Russian, it's called this. In Spanish, it's called this. In English, it's called this. But then you know nothing. All you know is what people call it. You've got to look at the bird. You've got to listen to the bird. You've got to know everything about the bird. So he's learning something about how to do science from biology. That wasn't basic physics right away. That's looking at a bird, learning how to do science there. Ants, birds, music, other stuff I forgot. Richard Feynman was into different things, and it was critical for his development, as the bird story shows. From what I've read in the book Range by David Epstein, Nobel Prize laureates, I think, are like 20 times more likely to have outside interests than other scientists. They're really involved in things. Galileo, he was brought up by his dad, who was a musician. His dad was one of the ones that started modern opera. Galileo played instruments, as we know. And, you know, stuff like that. It's probably why Sherlock Holmes played the violin in his stories. Bruce Lee was not all like head in the sand into martial arts. He was into philosophy, and he looked at all kinds of different things. He was about thought and action. Abraham Lincoln did not become a good lawyer by hyper focusing on that. He was in his 40s. He was struggling. The thing he did to make himself a better thinker and thereby a better lawyer and politician was to study and memorize Euclid's Elements. Early 50s to sometime before 1860, 3 years, 7 years, he spent memorizing Euclid's Elements, which consist of what we learn in high school geometry and more. It's two-dimensional, three-dimensional, the theory of ratio. So from what I've read and studied, you could, after Lincoln did that, you could come up to him and ask him a certain proof out of nowhere, and he could rattle it off right there because he had them all memorized. He wanted to know what it is to demonstrate. What does it mean to demonstrate something? Look it up in a dictionary. You see this little like word string. Didn't help him. To know what a demonstration was, he memorized Euclid's Elements, the proofs. And he didn't do it platonically, how to arbitrarily relate one thing to another. He knew it was more about reasoning and being involved in reality. Like Martin Luther King said. You know, wasn't all this airy-fairy stuff. Lincoln was learning how to think incisively and to think for himself. He was learning how to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Lincoln wanted to know how to present something to a jury, like a geometric proof. What's your given, your starting point? What do you need to make clear to the jury? This is what we know, and this is what we're going to prove. Then you got to know what you should reason from that, and when you can bring in new evidence, and how you develop that. So the jury can see what the truth is and form the correct conclusion, like proving something in geometry. That's multidisciplinary thinking. And it's important in human history. One thing that Newton and Galileo did was to show how exactly we use math to be scientific about the world and to understand motion. People were confused about it before. Ptolemy was all goofy. Plato was all goofy. People had to get Aristotle's ideas and develop them properly, go beyond Aristotle to see how to form generalizations and how to use math to identify cause-effect relationships and to do science and define things in physics. Multidisciplinary. astronomy was connected to physics. Math was connected better to astronomy. Math was connected to physics. William Harvey, one thing he did was connect math to biology. He measured how much blood was in the heart, in the body, so he could help improve that circulation actually happened. It wasn't just some armchair hypothesis. And as I say, so there's some examples right there of multidisciplinary thinking, connecting different fields. That's where some creativity comes into play. And as I say, there's a lot of people doing that in business and scientific research nowadays because they know that it helps. So it's something that's part of being a good human, thinking well, being a good human animal. So we should know how to do it in ourselves, know how it's been done in history, who's done what and when to some extent. What did Madame Curie do? She wasn't just hyper-focused on her research. She had general interests too. Or what about the great Hypatia, the leader of the Library of Alexandria? Aristotle discovered logic by looking at geometric proof and how it was done and generalizing from that. There's multidisciplinary thinking all over the place. Oh, and one thing that William Harvey did, besides bring math into play, to discover and prove and scientifically validate circulation in the body, blood circulation, he was reading Aristotle on water circulation, I think it was. The water cycle. How water evaporates, it goes into clouds, it falls down to the earth in rain, it's in the water, comes back around, and the sun heats that. And I'll have to look into it to get more detail, but so William Harvey might have got some things right, some things a little off. He might have thought that the heart warmed the blood and moved it. I don't know, unless he just thought, well, it was like the sun. The sun warms the water and makes it move. The heart's kind of like that. I'm not sure if he actually thought it warmed the blood or if there was just that similarity, but he got the idea for circulation by looking at the water cycle. Multidisciplinary. That's what we need. Plus, as I say, we need to be able to reach different students. As a teacher, who the hell cares? Why? Teaching science, people should know something about engineering, law, politics, art, history, literature, how they relate and interrelate. Same thing with math. Doing math on its own, who cares? I don't. It's for physics, for chemistry, for engineering, for biology, for fitness, for health, for diet, for nutrition. Physics, bring it into fitness. Then you're teaching people biomechanics and you're reinforcing what a good coach trained in the classical tradition would say. We can't just do whatever we want and be physically healthy and function as a good human animal. There are certain ways we need to move. And there'd be that reinforcement in science, math, fitness, PE, how to move well, and how to make for beautiful, fluid, agile movement. Math, science comes up in research in nutrition, health, fitness. Bring in fitness research, health research. Show the math, show the graphs, show the science. Let people care. So, in teacher training, we need logic. We need to know, as teachers, what our tools are, what we're using, because teaching is about conceptual knowledge. What is a concept? What is a generalization? How do we develop it? How do we form it step by step? We got to teach that to someone else. So that involves logic and grammar. Clear thinking, knowing what we're saying, knowing what the subject of a sentence is. I work with people for the SAT. Many juniors and seniors in high school cannot tell me what the subject of a sentence is. It's not their fault. Grammar's not taught. They kind of know what's being said. Obviously, they're not stupid. They go to some elite private schools, and they're going to some top universities in the country, but they are not aware conceptually of what exactly they're talking about as they should be. Logic, grammar, multidisciplinary thinking, why stuff's important in human life. There are some things we need for good teacher training. As I said, logic, a year or two to really get into this, maybe some basic stuff for a semester or two, and then how it applies more in education for another semester or two. Dig into the hierarchy of certain concepts in your field, in math, in physics, in chemistry, in fitness, in art. How do certain generalizations work in your field? Teachers could define words, define concepts, see how to present that in an age-appropriate, a cognitive-appropriate way to the students they're working with. Grammar, semester or two. And with that, in interdisciplinary thinking, there should be interaction between English teachers, language teachers, foreign language, math, physics. Some stuff some people do in English, they could diagram some theorems in geometry, some word problems in physics. That would help them know what's going on in these other subjects while learning English at the same time. Not too difficult to do. So, in grammar, public speaking. Teaching is public speaking, so clearly we need to know how to speak well and how to communicate. Grammar. Then maybe someone could do more public speaking in teacher education. Let me see. Look at my notes here. What else can we talk about? Yeah, and with grammar and logic, people would know about, in hierarchy, they'd know about different ways to say the same thing. You could teach someone something when they're young, then develop it more and more as you get older. So speaking about that, fitness. To do things well, all you got to say is be quiet. When you catch something, make as little noise as possible. When you land, make as little noise as possible. Then that could be developed in physics and math and fitness as you get older, instead of make as little noise as possible, which is clear, basic evidence of the senses stuff. A lot of people can get it. You could talk about energy. E is 1/2 mv squared. The faster something goes, the more energy it has, the louder it can be, the harder it can hurt. But there's a force necessary to stop something. It takes some work to stop something. So, and work is force times distance. So, you got to land, you got a certain body weight, you got to catch something, it is a certain weight. If you reach out towards a thing when you want to catch it and bring it in toward you and extend the distance, then the force you need to stop it will decrease. You got a certain amount of work you got to do on the thing to stop it. If the work is constant, like if the work is 100 and the force is 1, the distance can be 100. So work 100 equals force times distance, W equals FD. 100 equals 1 times 100. So with the distance of 100, you need a little teeny tiny little 1 of force. But if the distance is 1, then W equals FD. 100 equals 100 times 1. The force is a lot greater. Things like that. That's getting on a more abstract level of the same thing. Or if you're landing. And then with landings, you can get into all kinds of cool stuff about energy conservation. How fast are you going when you land? How much work does it take to stop yourself? It's a multiple body weight. I forget the exact formula. I think I got it right. If you got, like, you do the work to stop yourself, or the force, whatever, it's the distance of fall divided by how much you bend your knees, let's say, when you're stopping. So let's say, and then it's times, that'd be like your weight times that plus 1. So let's say you're going, you weigh 100 pounds, and you fall from 6 feet, and you take 1 foot to stop yourself. You know, your once your feet touch the ground, your belly button goes down 1 foot. Let's say you're up 6 feet. You're up 6 feet, you jump on the ground, your feet touch the ground, then you bend your knees really quickly, and your belly button goes 1 foot down, and you stand back up, and it goes back, and it's 1 foot. So you fell 6 feet, you used 1 foot of knee bend to stop yourself. 6 over 1 is 6. Then we add 1 to that, and that's 7. That'd be 7 times your body weight. 7 times 100 is 700 pounds. Or if someone is not very smart and they don't bend their knees, they don't know how to land well, they haven't had a good physical education, as too many Americans nowadays do. They don't know how to land, they don't know how to fall, they don't know how to jump, they don't know how to roll, unfortunately, because of our culture. Let's say someone jumps and they land like with their knees straight. And let's pretend they still like compress like 1 inch. That's 1/12 of a foot. So 6 feet up divided by 1/12 is 6 times 12, 72. 72 plus 1 is 73. 73 times their body weight is required to stop it. That's like 73 times 100 is 7,300 pounds. That would help people see why they should land better, why they should have good biomechanics. And it's a real story, kind of like, I know someone who was dared to jump off a 12-foot wall, and she did. And then she was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Her back and her hips and her knee will never be the same again for the rest of her life. If we had a better culture, she would know the magnitude of what's going on with the force there, but she would know how to jump and land. There's a lot of things that cause this to happen. It's not just, oh, she was so stupid, why wouldn't you do that? It was a bad decision maybe, but there's a lot of things that she should have been given, a lot of tools she should have been given by the adults and elders in our culture. It should be different. So, some other examples with some logic. Hopefully this is a good development of each of these 4 things, why they're important, why we need them, how they matter, how they would help teachers and students in the culture. I know some of this from my own experience. Having tutored and taught publicly and privately for decades, I don't have like a small unscientific sample. It's more general and more appropriate to generalize from, as long as you keep the context. As I say with Newton, we want to keep our generalizations rooted in the concretes and context that we have. So, I work with people for decades in public schools, private schools, elite private schools, some of the best in the state, top 100 in the country, boarding schools. I worked with homeschoolers. I've worked with people at magnet schools. I've worked with people who are doing like D's and F's and just want to pass. They don't care. They just let me pass, please, math or whatever. I've worked with people who've gone from like D's and F's or whatever, maybe C's, to A's. I've worked with people who want, maybe they could get B's or A's on their own, but they're in a very competitive academic environment and they want A pluses. They want to do the best they can. Compete at the school they're in, compete to get into some like elite college. So there's a lot of variation. So, and I've seen this stuff help. I've learned through the years. Of course, obviously I didn't know this stuff my whole life. I would learn and develop. Spent a few decades not knowing some of this stuff at all. Being a putz. Not explaining things very well. Not knowing how to be a good human animal. Gag me with a spoon. It's like, please let me forget it. But logic, science, good philosophy has helped me like learn, do better, explain. So some examples. I know, like for example, I've worked with some people, like someone in chemistry years ago, more than a decade probably, and she knew stuff so well that she was confident enough to go in front of the classroom and work problems. Someone I worked with in Algebra 2, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, I think this is when she was in Algebra 2. She knew the material so well, she was getting A's and she was teaching other students how to do the work. And I know that on authority from her teacher. The teacher wrote a letter and the teacher actually gave me permission to use part of that as testimonial. But the teacher was saying that the student I tutored was like knocking it out of the ballpark. She was getting an A, but not only that, she was helping other students, teaching them how to do the stuff. I know someone at some point I worked with in calculus at some elite private school says, it's her report, she's the only one in class that gets it. You know, maybe there's a few other people she's just doing for the most part. But she's saying a lot of people in class do not understand what they're doing and are not ready to go on. And she's getting it and it's obvious. And she's just like, okay, let's go. But I'll just wait because I'm nice. She's getting it. Others aren't. Someone I've worked with was able to get a 93 on an English paper, and that was, I think, his first day in English, maybe ever, if not just that year or all the time. I'm not sure. I don't recall. But I just worked with him on the content. He could have done better than 93 if we would have had another session and gone over his essay. But I don't know. Time's limited and finite. He has other subjects. He's got a life. I don't know when the due date was. But worked on that. Someone I worked with, as I talked about before, has gotten a 102 in immunology at a top Texas university. And he reported that he got the 102. He reported that it was the highest grade his teacher had given in 20 years teaching there. So, in other words, think about that. He did better than all these people who the teacher had, the professor had, from all these elite private schools, magnet schools, you know, like DeBakey in town in Houston is a magnet school that focuses on medicine. Yet, he does better in immunology than all them. And he knows explicitly that it was because of what I taught him. He learned how to reason, what reason and logic are, what science really is, not some fake ideas about it, how to study and memorize. And he was able to take those things and on his own get the 102. He got an A in kinesiology because he was good on his own, but partly because I taught him how to do a good squat. And he reported to me that his teacher said, his professor, that it was the best squat he'd ever seen a non-athlete do. And I don't know to what extent it was an exaggeration or just he was one of the best, but you get the idea. I worked with him high school, little junior high school, little college, math, SAT, some physics and chemistry. So we got to do some good thinking. He got to see what science really is, what multidisciplinary thinking is. Because when we're doing some physics or chemistry, if, in his case, unfortunately, like with some people when I'm tutoring them, let's stick to the homework, then they can never learn anything. It's sad. But with him, he knew that we were doing some important things for life in general and for reasoning that would help him all through life. Clearly it did. But we had to go over, okay, what is science? Why is it important? So because, and then focusing on him, as I said, who are you teaching? What matters to them? How can you bring this home to them? So we talked about cats, how to care for them. What is their nature? What diet should they have and why? What's the research behind it? What's the science? Forget convention. Forget what anybody says, whether they're a vet or not. What does reality say? What should we all think? So he also went into college knowing how to read a research paper when a lot of people he knew, most, all, whatever, they did not know how to read a research paper. But he went in knowing how to do it. So there's some proof of concept. As a tutor, I have to work with people who need explanation and clarification because their teacher didn't do it well enough. And again, it's not like I'm working with a biased sample of only people who get Fs. I work with a broad variety, have worked with a broad variety of people, all kinds of different schools, private, elite private, public, magnet, homeschooled, people who get good grades but want to do better, all across the board. I must be getting tired. Maybe I need diet or something. I forgot what I was going to say. Obviously. Brain's turning off. Sorry. But, yeah, I've worked with people, and whatever I was going to say, that is the case. Proof of concept. Logic matters. I found that out. And one thing I like to talk about a little bit, a specific case, as I say, working with that one guy, letting him get a 93 on his paper. How did I do that? Here I am, originally his math tutor, and I'm able to work with him in English, doing some logic, writing an essay. I do not do English. I refuse to read every novel that they're going to teach in English. I'm not going to learn too much about grammar, dig into all these fine details or get a PhD in it. No, thank you. But I can do this stuff. Clearly, the grade showed it. But it was awesome working with this guy. We were doing a paper on the poem The Tiger. And I'll talk individually about that in an episode. But he was going to write about literary elements, which was not the assignment. I had to say, look at this. Okay, let's read it. It says literary devices. What is a literary device? We bring in the question to get him to think. We have to look at examples of literary devices, distinguish it to literary element, So he knows what's going on. He knows I know what's going on. And then he can, with more repetition and practice of this stuff, he could be able to do this more on his own. But we had to look at literary device. Okay, how the heck do we get the concept of literary device? So then we got to look at specific examples of literary device. We cannot generalize literary device as a concept or classification until we know what it is that concretely makes it up. So we got to look at alliteration, metaphor, simile, synecdoche, things like that. But to know what those concepts are, we need examples of them. We would identify examples, talk about them, write some down, write down the terms, know what literary devices is, therefore we know what the assignment should be about, and then we can attack the poem, The Tiger. And then to let them see some things about maybe if there's personification in there, read the poem. Okay, how does that make you feel? To get him to think about it really and viscerally, put himself in that situation, to get him to take ideas seriously instead of just airy-fairy reading it. This is how you do poetry. This is how you do reading. What does the words mean concretely? Logic. So we got this emotional, visceral, person-to-person discussion. What's the word? It's all informed by logic, by identifying what's going on in the world, knowing that it matters as humans. Not like Spock, who's fundamentally illogical in some ways because he denies his own nature. I'm going to pretend I don't have emotion. That's illogical. Logic is identifying the nature of the things out there. And as a human animal, that means also its relevance to us, the value aspect. Why does it matter? Who cares? And then I'm able to explain some things to him. And that would help. Okay, but with the tiger, we did that. We talked about, we formed concepts for certain specific literary devices. Then we got the generalization, we got the general idea of literary device. We analyzed the poem. It's a lot of logic coming into play here. Using examples of what the poem says and how you'd feel. What it would mean in terms of cause-effect situations. Bringing some of that into play, people would understand and appreciate a lot of literature more. And then they'd be able to bring more out of it. Who the heck would you want to hire? Someone who can make something real and define his terms as a marketer. Or someone who's lost in abstractions and reads the assignment and doesn't even do it right. The person who's going to be good at marketing and earn the money and help out is the one who's going to be real. It could be multidisciplinary, grasp human life. Like Apple was good at that with not just, our cell phone has 5.3 gigabytes of memory and goes at 62 hertz. Ha! No one cares. What you care about is being able to carry around the music you love, share it with other people, take pictures and send it to someone else. That's what matters. Make it real. And then with logic, you can explain better. And that's a situation that needs to improve. Like Richard Feynman brought it up too. Here's something real good I like. This should be studied by all teachers to help them see how to explain better and do physics better. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist. Okay, this is from Judging Books by Their Covers, the article. I think it's from, this is here. Okay, so here, I'll put a link to this, but there's this introduction to the article Judging Books by Their Covers. In the introduction on this website, to tell you what's going on or establish context, it says, in 1964, the eminent physicist Richard Feynman served on the state of California's Curriculum Commission and saw how the commission chose math textbooks for use in California's public schools. In his acerbic memoir of that experience, titled Judging Books by Their Covers, Feynman analyzed the commission's idiotic method of evaluating books, and he described some of the tactics employed by school book salesmen who wanted the commission to adopt their shoddy products. Judging Books by Their Covers appeared as a chapter in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which is Feynman's autobiographical book that was published in 1985 by W. W. Norton and Company, unquote. Okay. Now, he was asked about science books also, and this quote's about science. So, Feynman writes in the article, okay, he did some introduction in the article, then he talks about some math books, now he's talking about some science. Okay, so, quote, it was a pretty big job, and I worked all the time at it down in the basement. My wife says that during this period, it was like living over a volcano. It would be quiet for a while, and all of a sudden, blow! There would be a big explosion from the, quote, volcano, unquote, below. The reason was that the books were so lousy. They were false. They were hurried. They would try to be rigorous, but they would use examples like automobiles in the street for sets, which were almost okay, but in which there were always some subtleties. The definitions weren't accurate. Everything was a little ambiguous. They weren't smart enough to understand what was meant by rigor. They were faking it. They were teaching something they didn't understand and which was, in fact, useless at that time for the child. It's vaguely right, but already trouble. That's the way everything was. Everything was written by somebody who didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So it was a little bit wrong, always. And how are we going to teach well by using books written by people who don't quite understand what they're talking about? I cannot understand. I don't know why, but the books are always lousy, universally lousy. What finally clinched it, it made me ultimately resign, was that the following year we were going to discuss science books. I thought maybe the science would be different, so I looked at a few of them. The same thing happened. Something would look good at first and then turn out to be horrifying. For example, there was a book that started out with 4 pictures. First, there was a wind-up toy. Then there was an automobile. Then there was a boy riding a bicycle. Then there was something else. And underneath each picture it said, "What makes it go?" I thought, I know what it is. They're going to ask about mechanics, how the springs work inside the toy, about chemistry, how the engine of the automobile works, and biology, how the muscles work. It was the kind of thing my father would have talked about. Quote, "What makes it go?" "Everything goes because the sun is shining," unquote. And then we would have fun discussing it. "No, the toy goes because the spring is wound up," I would say. "How did the spring get wound up?" he would ask. "I wound it up." "And how did you get moving?" "From eating." "And food grows only because the sun is shining. So it's because the sun is shining that all these things are moving," unquote. That would get the concept across that motion is simply the transformation of the sun's power. I turned the page. The answer was, for the wind-up toy, every energy makes it go. And for the boy on the bicycle, energy makes it go. For everything, energy makes it go. Now that doesn't mean anything. Suppose it's Wakalixes. That's the general principle. Wakalixes makes it go. There's no knowledge coming in. The child doesn't learn anything. It's just a word. What they should have done is to look at the wind-up toy, see that there are springs inside, learn about springs, learn about wheels, and never mind energy. Later on, when the children know something about how the toy actually works, they can discuss the more general principles of energy. It's also not even true that energy makes it go. Because if it stops, you could say energy makes it stop just as well. What they're talking about is concentrated energy being transformed into more dilute forms, which is a very subtle aspect of energy. Energy is neither increased nor decreased in these examples. It's just changed from one form to another. And when the things stop, the energy is changed into heat, into general chaos. But that's the way all the books were. They said things that were useless, mixed up, ambiguous, confusing, and partially incorrect. How anybody can learn science from these books, I don't know, because it's not science, unquote. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize-winning physicist, also regarded as one of the great physics teachers of the 1900s. He knew what he was doing. He knew how to explain because he knew some logic. He knew some science. And he could write books. And my kitty agrees. So, I had to go pick him up. Right, kitty? So there's a very good example of the logic of explanation, why it's important. That right there could be studied, analyzed in teacher training courses to make people aware of it in the first place. And with epistemology, logic, there could be better explanations, as Richard Feynman points out. And as I say, as this gets put into education more, when people learn some stuff in junior high school and high school as they should, then it can be better in teacher training. But now, this basic stuff needs to be done. And yeah, looking at my notes here, like another thing, I've seen some like bad explanations in like work problems in algebra. Like someone can paint a room in 5 hours. Someone else can paint a room in 8 hours. How long would it take them to work together? I've worked with someone on that. And the teacher didn't even know what she was doing. She was teaching it wrong. And it was sad. This kid, he was like struggling with math, couldn't quite explain things, had learning difficulties, like I did when I was in high school, and beyond. But I was able to explain it to him really well in terms of starting with the basic example. Word problems. Some teachers come out of nowhere in midstream. This abstraction just jumps out of nowhere as if it's like a rock or a tree or a dog. It's not. It's not on that level of concreteness. It's abstract. Know the hierarchy. Where does this stuff come from? Work problems. Someone can paint a room in 6 hours. Okay. Start to break it down. If they paint for 3 hours, how much of the room have they done? 3 hours out of 6. Well, if they go in uniform, half the room. They go for 2 hours. 2 hours, how much of the room do they have done? 2 hours out of 6 hours, they did 2 and 2 and 2, 2, 4, 6. If they did that 2 hours 3 times, they'd get it done. So 2 over 6, a third, they got a third done. Or however you want to think about it. Just straight up 2 over 6, 3 over 6, or whatever. Depending on the person and what they need. And then if someone else is doing it, someone else can paint the room in 8 hours. Okay, what if they've alone painted it for 4? 4 hours out of 8, they're half done. What about 2? 2 hours out of 8, they're a quarter done. Okay, so then we learn to put how much they've worked divided by how long it takes to see what fraction they've done. Then we got part plus part equals whole, an idea that comes up a lot. Even in like energy, when people learn that friction leads to heat, which is a form of energy, you got energy of motion, mechanical energy. Well, some of it's dissipated. Where the hell did it go? It's got to be somewhere. Part plus part equals whole. Conservation of energy goes into heat. Part plus part equals whole is an idea we use in a lot of places. And it helps us see that friction produces heat, and that's where some energy can go and be lost. In this, part plus part equals whole. What one person does plus another person equals 1. So time over 6 plus time over 8 equals the whole entire job being done. Then work it out from there. Do some examples. What if they each work 2 hours? 2 over 6 plus 2 over 8, a third plus a quarter, is that 1? No. And then you continue on, depending on what the person needs and all that. But make it concrete, make it real. And I know that's not done enough because I work with people on the SAT and ACT. Do you know how many people think of putting numbers in for letters on their own? None, almost. I don't think I've had anybody that knows how to do that consistently and smartly. Basic, simple strategy. Being concrete. Richard Feynman did it. When he'd be thinking through a theory, he would always have a concrete example because thinking is in concretes. Abstractions are used to think about real things. Remember, as we said, knowledge is an awareness of reality. Point at your head, awareness. Point out at something, reality. Knowledge is an awareness of reality. There's got to be a reality to have knowledge. We need concretes for concepts and abstractions to be real. Put in numbers. Use numbers to figure things out like this with the work problem or whatever. And with Feynman, one thing he would do, like he reports in some of his writings, maybe it was in Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman also, I forgot. But sometimes he'd be talking to a fellow PhD physicist, smart person, whatever. And the person's up doing all these math equations on the board. Feynman makes up an example and follows along with the example. And then the professor doing math says something, and Feynman realizes in his head that doesn't work. And Feynman says, your math is wrong. And the professor says, well, where? What do I do with my math? Where's it wrong? And Feynman would say, I don't know, but your math is wrong because it doesn't work. The guy on the board was not being real about his math. He was lost in math. He wasn't connected to the world with concretes. Same thing with that teacher or that guy. Teacher had these equations. Oh, you just apply these equations to this stuff and it's right. No, the teacher was totally wrong and confused this kid. Unfortunately, because of where he was, he didn't know who to believe and stuff. He couldn't see that I was right and that I could prove it and develop it. Sad. But, as I say, I wasn't the best when I was in high school either. So, Thomas Edison, regarded as an imbecile in second grade, stuff like that. You probably know stories like that. And I know working with people on projectiles in physics sometimes, that's not developed concretely in a context. If people would do that and think, okay, these are projectiles, give concretes to conceptualize with contrast in a context, as I say, with like furniture. Furniture, these things are alike in their furniture in contrast to chairs and beds, in context of a house, and in contrast to silverware and forks and food and dogs and stuff like that. Projectiles tell people what a certain thing is. You throw a rock, you shoot an arrow, kind of like a drop of water, things like that, versus a bird flying or a feather falling or a rocket that's propelled. So we can see these concrete things are projectiles and these are not. Then work with these. What are they like? What happens? Then it's pretty clear how they go up and go down. Only gravity's acting on them. They don't have some internal force on them, or they don't have something outside of making them go, like whirling a ball around on a string. Some people can't do some questions that they're asked about projectiles because they don't know in reality what it is. They don't know what they're talking about. That should be brought up in teaching properly. Teachers should be trained to do that right. This is what knowledge is. It's a basic thing. Knowledge is an awareness of reality. When we form a concept like projectile, we need concretes that are similar in contrast to others in a context. Furniture, projectiles. Simile, metaphor, synecdoche, all over the place. Or running, jumping, walking, things like that. So, and those are some examples from my own experience, how logic has helped people be successful and know what they're talking about. Be real, not merely get good grades, but be real in the world. So to have good teacher education, we need logic, because a teacher, as we said, okay, education. Education is the systematic training of the minds of the young in order to instill in them the knowledge and methods needed for adult human life, to be independent, to be able to stand on their own, to have a good life, to help the friends and family they love, to help the culture be better, to be a good contributing member of the tribe or the team. A teacher is one who should know how to convey knowledge, because that's what a teacher is. A teacher conveys knowledge to another human being, human to human. As Maria Montessori said, to paraphrase, the vision of the teacher should be at once like that of a scientist and that of a saint. Logic is important. Martin Luther King Jr. identified that also. We see in what Feynman said about explanation, it's logic. We need to know about knowledge, how it works, what it's made up of. Concepts, induction, generalization, classification, definition, explanation, proof and validation. Do we need to know about certain principles of logic, hierarchy, integration, everything's connected, context. That should be part of teacher training. Teaching is about conveying knowledge. So teachers should be masters of the knowledge process to some extent. Not, so much like a logician or epistemologist or philosopher, but they need to be aware of it, just as not everyone's going to be an expert grammarian, but we still all need to know grammar, to be the master of our tools, our thoughts, our language, our words. That's another thing teachers should know. Parsing sentences, which is identifying the part of speech of something in a sentence and how it relates to others. Sentence diagramming does it really well. Gives you a good picture of what's essential and what feeds into the essential and describes it. Knowing better about language helps us communicate better, read better, write better, think better, make up better worksheets, write better books, pick better books, explain things that aren't explained in a book too well, break apart word problems so students know what they're about, break apart theorems in geometry or whatever so students know what they're about. It helps you be more cognizant and appreciative of word choice and word order. Logic, grammar, multidisciplinary thinking, math. How does math come up in physics with levers to help us understand how to do a deadlift, or how the foot works in running, or how putting the head too far forward adds more weight to what the neck has to support, causes deformations in the spine, things like that. How when a horse steps on the ground, it causes pressure, which helps drive fluids through the horse's body. And therefore, without being able to move around, horses cannot be as healthy as necessary. Multidisciplinary thinking. Lincoln studying geometry, Aristotle discovering and developing ideas about logic from studying geometric proof. William Harvey learning about circulation by reading Aristotle and applying math to biology. Clearly, human life, we should all know how that's important and relevant. But that's what we need in teacher training. Hopefully that's developed each of those 4 things sufficiently and in detail in context of education, giving you some examples of how there's already been proof of concept. I mean, hell, history's about it. We should know kind of philosophically that education's about reasoning, and if we can reason better, we can teach better and learn better, you know? So it's both philosophic, which is from a science identified from concretes anyway, but we got all these concrete examples as well. So I hope that helps. That's what I would require of teachers. That's what I would do. These things everyone would have to study to become a teacher so they could do it well. This should be instituted in different teacher training programs in the country. Even if some private schools don't require like a certificate, but some of this stuff could still be done for the teachers to train them to be better. It would make the school better. It makes the school better, gives them more prestige, gets in more money, makes the students better. The school and teachers should care about the students. Students are more successful academically, more successful in getting into colleges and the careers they want. They can think better, so they're being more real about what they do. They're more successful and real and true. They'll be more sure about not promoting bad ideas in the culture. They'll be independent thinkers, so they'll help more, so they'll correct things more. So, a lot of stuff. Montessori is great, but it doesn't know this stuff. This would help Montessori teachers as well. Montessori education, Montessori schools, Montessori teachers, private schools, public schools, teacher certification programs, everywhere. It's about living better, loving life, helping yourself, being the best you can be, helping those you care about. Ultimately, that's what this would help us do. So, hope you enjoyed that. Hope it was valuable and interesting and informative. So thank you for listening, if you made it all the way through, or listening parts. Hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.